Welcome to the deep dive. Today,
We're diving into the world of participatory art.
oh, cool.
You know,
The kind of art that,
invites you in, blurs the lines,
Yeah.
makes you part of the experience.
we've got all these essays and artist writings,
Okay.
and you want to really understand
How this whole thing evolved,
Done.
the history.
the big ideas,
Yeah, especially.
how participatory art intersects with, society and politics.
It's definitely fascinating.
You know what I think is so interesting?
Is that it challenges,
How we think about art,
like, what it even is.
what it can do.
I mean, for centuries,
The art world was all about,
observing from a distance. Right.
don't touch it.
But participatory art just,
Throws that out the window.
it does.
I'm curious, though,
Where did this idea even come from?
of breaking down the barrier between art and the viewer.
Is it like a modern thing?
Well, the term participatory art might be
Alright.
relatively new,
But the idea of involving the audience,
way back.
like in the early 20th century,
You had the Dada movement.
they were already staging these wild,
but it's
provocative events.
They called them artificial hells.
The Dadaists,
I've heard of them.
weren't they all about like
Absurdity and chaos, masters of disruption,
They wanted to like
shake people up,
challenge norms.
and audience participation.
was like a key tool for them.
They even held a mock trial,
Of this famous author, Maurice Perez.
and they invited the public to be the jury. A mock trial. That's incredible.
So they were already experimenting then.
With blurring the lines between art and life.
Yeah, in a way they were.
But at the same time,
You also had these massive
orchestrated spectacles happening,
in the Soviet Union,
also using participation.
but with a totally different agenda.
So both were using participation.
But for different ends.
Right.
The Dadaists were all about
Disruption,
diversity,
creative anarchy.
while the Soviets were aiming for unity.
And they often use these
Spectacles to promote their ideology.
It highlights that.
The intention behind participatory art,
Really matters.
but it's really,
In the latter half of the 20th century,
we see this
more deliberate
conceptual approach.
to participatory art.
Got it.
So fast forward to more recent times,
Our notes mention Claire Bishop.
and her writing about
How participatory art pushes this idea
of erasing the line.
between performer and audience.
Bishop's work is key here.
She really dives into
How participatory art aims to
dissolve those traditional categories.
She gives some great examples.
Artists like Hélio Oiticica,
Incorporating samba dancing into his work.
Adrian Piper using funk,
Or even Tom Marioni.
who made beer drinking.
Wait,
Beer drinking as art.
now that's a concept I can get behind.
It sounds like participatory art can take on...
So many forms.
It does.
It's incredibly diverse.
And always evolving.
Think of someone like Joseph Beuys.
He integrated political discussions.
Into his art.
Or Martha Rosler.
Who turned a garage sale.
Into an artistic statement.
And then there's this whole trend of artists.
Running places like cafes.
Hotels.
Even travel agencies.
as part of their artistic practice.
Wow.
A travel agency run by an artist.
I'm not sure I'd trust them with my vacation plans.
But I get the idea.
It's like they're bringing art into
Be every day.
making it a part of life.
Exactly.
It's about collapsing those distinctions.
And this connects to
Another fascinating concept from the sources
Bertolt Brecht's idea.
of the open work.
Okay,
Open work.
what exactly does eco mean by that?
Well, Eco argued
That certain artworks
are intentionally designed,
with a kind of openness
inviting the audience
to actively interpret.
and complete them
Think of it like a puzzle,
with multiple solutions.
where the
Or
audience becomes,
a co-creator of the meaning.
so it's not just about,
Observing art.
it's about engaging with it
Shaping its meaning.
through your own participation.
Exactly.
And eco
That's
gives
a really interesting example.
to illustrate different levels of openness.
There's Luciano Berrios,
Sequence for solo flute
where the musician has freedom.
within a set structure,
Then there's medieval allegorical readings.
offering a fixed number.
Predetermined interpretations.
But his most captivating example,
Is probably James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake.
Finnegan's Wake.
Now that's a book notorious for its...
Complexity.
How does that fit into...
The open work idea
Eco describes Finnegan's Wake.
as this incredibly
Yeah.
multi-layered work
That's constant.
bending back on itself.
It's full of puns.
Wordplay.
An illusion.
Creating this intricate web of meaning
It demands active participation.
from the reader.
Who becomes an explorer.
Navigating this labyrinth of language
Okay.
I'm getting a headache just thinking about it.
But I see the connection.
It's like the book itself.
Is an invitation to participate.
To unravel its mysteries.
And create your own meaning.
And this ties into
the idea of participatory art, right?
where the audience isn't
just a passive observer,
but an active participant.
Absolutely.
And what's fascinating is
how this connects to another idea.
the death of the author.
Whoa, hold on.
The death of the author.
That sounds pretty dramatic.
Are we saying
Authors are irrelevant now.
not exactly?
This comes from?
The literary critic Roland Barthes.
What he's getting at is
The meaning of a work
isn't solely determined.
by the author's intentions
Instead, the meaning is created.
in the act of reading.
Or experiencing the work.
So it's like
shifting the focus.
from the creator to the audience.
Exactly.
Barthes argues that
The reader,
the viewer,
the participant,
they become essential.
in the creation of meaning.
He even analyzes a simple sentence
From Balzac,
to illustrate this.
showing how the meaning
Doesn't originate from a single person.
but emerges in the space of reading.
That's fascinating.
How these ideas from literature
Should apply.
so well to visual art.
And it makes me think about
How participatory art
is part of a much broader shift.
in how we think about
Art
it.
and its purpose.
It definitely is.
And this brings us to
Another critical thinker
Peter Berger
and his work
on
on.
historical avant-garde.
Okay.
The avant-garde,
I know. They were all about
pushing boundaries.
challenging the status quo.
What does Berger have to say about them?
In relation to,
Participatory art.
well, Berger argued,
That avant-garde movements,
like Dadaism
surrealism,
and constructivism,
were driven by this desire
to break down the separation.
between art and life.
They wanted art to be
A force for social change
not just something you hang.
in a museum
So they saw art
as having a real-world impact
not just existing
in this separate aesthetic realm.
exactly
They wanted to integrate art,
into everyday life
to make it a tool
for social
and political transformation.
and in a way
You can see participatory art.
as continuing this avant-garde impulse
This trite
to blur the lines,
and made art
a more active force.
in the world.
But I imagine
There are complexities.
to this idea of merging art and life, right?
I mean, it can't be.
That simple.
You're right.
It's definitely not.
That simple.
And Berger himself was wary.
Of what he called,
False sublation.
which is when art is,
Integrated into life.
but in a way,
that ends up soon.
the very systems.
is trying to critique
Can you give an example?
of that false sublation look like
In the context of,
participatory art
well, imagine a participatory art project,
that claims to empower a community,
but ends up just reinforcing
existing power structures,
or being used for,
marketing purposes.
it's a tricky balance
But what's important is
that we think critically
your
about
intentions
the content
and the actual impact.
of these projects.
It makes sense.
So it's not just about
Participation.
for participation's sake,
It's about being aware of
the potential pitfalls,
and ensuring
a
that
participatory aspect,
is genuinely serving
a meaningful purpose.
exactly.
And this leads us to
Another fascinating,
that emerges in our sources
the idea of community,
and its connection to
participatory art.
community.
That's an interesting angle.
How does participatory art,
Relate to the idea of,
community,
well, it seems like,
a lot of participatory art projects
are driven by this desire
for shared experiences
to bring people together.
and foster a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Art has always had the power
To connect
to
people,
create a sense of
shared emotion.
or understanding.
But are there
Any specific thinkers
who explored this connection
between art and community?
in more depth?
There are.
One thinker who comes to mind,
Is Jean-Luc Nancy?
particularly his essay on
The inoperative community.
the inoperative community.
What does that even mean?
It sounds kind of,
Paradoxical?
it is a bit of a head scratcher.
Nancy is grappling with
The complexities of community
this deep human desire,
for connect,
especially in our modern world, which can
feel
so fragmented and alienating.
but he also cautions
The
against.
pursuit of a
Human
unified
desire.
community.
So he's saying that
While community is important,
we should be wary of
and she is striving
some
to
kind of utopian ideal.
exactly
Nancy argues that
attempts to create a
totally unified
well, he
community
can actually be destructive.
leading to what he calls,
The suicide of the community.
it's this warning
It's
against
absolute fusion.
absolute sameness.
And it's relevant to participatory art
which often seeks to create
temporary communities, shared experiences.
That's a really interesting point.
So participatory art can be a way
To explore
these complexities of community,
to find ways to connect
with others,
without falling into the trap
of trying to erase
What?
or individuality. It's about embracing
and the diversity
of human connection.
recognizing that community.
Isn't about achieving
Some perfect unity,
but rather about
navigating different
negotiating
shared meaning,
and acknowledging
the inherent inoperativeness
of it all.
Wow.
That's pretty deep. We've gone from beer drinking as art
To the death of the author.
to the complexities of community.
Where do we go from here?
Well, maybe it's time.
We start exploring
Some concrete example
of contemporary participatory art
and see how these ideas play out.
in the real world.
That's good to me.
I'm ready to see how these theories...
I'm to life.
All right, so let's jump into some concrete examples.
One artist whose work really embodies this idea of participatory art as social commentary.
Is Christoph Schlingensief?
Oh yeah, he's the one behind Please Love Austria, right?
That project really made headlines.
Exactly, it was in 2000.
Schlingensief set up this installation in Vienna,
That looked like a detention center.
right? In a public square.
I remember reading about that.
It caused quite a stir.
But was it an actual detention center?
It wasn't a functioning facility, no.
It was an artistic representation.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
He invited asylum seekers to live in this container.
With cameras broadcasting their daily lives online.
Then the public could vote on which asylum seeker should be evicted.
Wow, that's heavy.
He really pushed the boundaries there.
Forcing people to confront this very real issue.
Of immigration.
Exactly.
And that's what makes this project
So fascinating to analyze.
in the context of what we've been discussing.
Remember Debord's Society of the Spectacle?
Schlingensief used that spectacle.
The media attention.
Highlight
The very real human impact.
of these policies.
And how does it tie into...
Berger's idea of false sublation.
Well, some critics argued
That by turning
such a serious issue.
into a kind of game show,
Schlingensief might have trivialized,
the suffering of the asylum seekers.
potentially even reinforcing negative stereotypes.
So it raises this question.
Can participatory art truly challenge the system,
Or does it risk?
becoming absorbed by it?
It's a question worth considering.
And it shows how participatory art,
Can be a double-edged sword.
but ultimately,
Schlingensief did spark.
a huge debate, right?
He absolutely did.
And that was kind of his point,
To shake people out of their apathy,
to force them.
to confront uncomfortable truths.
And what's even more striking is that
This artistic representation
of a detention center
actually provoked more outrage.
than the real detention center.
Located just outside Vienna.
It's like people were more willing
You engage with the issue.
when it was presented as art,
Maybe because it felt
less threatening.
more accessible.
It's possible.
And that speaks volumes
About the power of art
to raise awareness.
and challenge perceptions.
Speaking of challenging perceptions,
Another artist who comes to mind,
is Kirsten Haller.
he's known for creating these large-scale installations,
That are like
giant playgrounds for adults,
encouraging people to step outside.
their comfort zones.
Yes.
And one project that really exemplifies that.
Is the Bodwin Bedwine experiment
He invited people to deviate
from their normal routines?
in a series of increasingly unusual ways.
So what exactly?
Did participants have to do
Well, imagine getting a set of instructions
that gradually lead you
further and further away.
from your planned activities?
It could be something as simple as,
Taking a different route home,
or something much more drastic,
like leaving work
in the middle of the day.
to go on an unexpected adventure.
That's a pretty cool concept.
It's like he's saying,
Hey, break free from your routine.
and see where life takes you.
Exactly.
And it plays with that idea
Of errantry.
that Glissant talks about.
This embrace of the unexpected,
The willingness to step outside
of your comfort zone.
and encounter the unknown.
It's a great reminder
That sometimes
the most meaningful experiences
come from venturing.
off the beaten path.
Now,
On a completely different note,
let's shift gears to Jeremy Deller's project.
the Battle of Orgreave.
This one involved a reenactment
Of a historical event,
of
right?
the clash between miners and police.
During the 1984 miners' strike in England.
Right.
What makes this project so powerful?
Is that Deller?
Didn't just hire actors,
He involved people who had actually been there,
former miners and police officers
alongside members.
of historical reenactment societies,
So it was a collaboration
between those who lived through the event
and those who specialized.
in recreating the past.
What an interesting mix
I'm curious, what do you think
Deller was trying to achieve.
with this project?
I think he was exploring
The power of collective memory,
and how we process
historical trauma.
by bringing together these diverse perspectives
He created a space for dialogue
for different narratives
to intersect
and challenge each other.
and, in a way,
That connects back to
Nancy's idea
of the inoperative community, right?
It's not about
Erasing the differences.
or pretending
There's a
that's
single,
by truth,
but rather about
a complex
and contradictions.
of shared experience.
Exactly. It's about recognizing
That history is never.
neutral or objective
It's always filtered
through individual.
and collective perspectives,
This brings us to Bertolt Brecht,
whose work also revolves around,
the idea of shared experience.
but in a very different way,
He's known for creating these immersive installations,
where the art is literally about,
sharing a meal with others.
yes, Venetia,
He's the one who transforms gallery spaces,
into these communal kitchens
serving food,
and inviting people to eat together.
his work challenges,
The traditional notion of art
as something to
be passively observed
Instead, he invites us to participate,
in a very basic human act.
sharing food
In connection.
and connection.
I love that.
It really breaks down the barriers
Between art,
and everyday life.
making it accessible to everyone.
It's like he's saying,
Hey, art can be as simple
and essential.
as breaking bread with others,
Exactly.
and speaks to
This inherent human need
for connection.
for community,
Or it's about creating a space.
where those traditional hierarchies
Yeah.
of the art world
Artist,
you
viewer,
melt away,
and everyone.
is on equal footing.
It's a really powerful concept.
And it reminds me of another artist
Who blurs those lines?
between art and life.
Thomas Hirschhorn,
Didn't he create a whole project?
dedicated to the philosopher.
Michel Foucault,
He did
24 Foucault,
was this incredible temporary space
where he invited people to engage
with Foucault's ideas,
through lectures,
discussions,
film screening,
even a bar.
and a radio station.
Wow.
So he basically created...
A 24-hour Foucault festival
That's a pretty ambitious way to get people thinking.
about philosophy.
It was.
And it shows how participatory art
Can be a powerful tool.
for education and engagement
Bringing complex ideas
out of the academic world.
and into a more accessible...
Interactive space.
That's like taking philosophy
And out of the ivory tower.
and making it something
Everyone can participate in.
and learn from. Speaking of creating spaces,
For dialogue and collaboration.
we can't forget.
The Utopia Station project?
Oh, yes.
This one involved multiple artists, right?
Weren't they trying to envision
A better world.
through art?
Exactly.
Holly Nesbitt
Hans Ulrich Obrist
and Bertolt Brecht
came together
to create these temporary spaces,
where they invited artists,
writers,
and thinkers
to contribute their vision.
of utopia. So it was like
A brainstorming session.
for a better future.
You could say that.
It was about exploring
The possibilities and limitations,
of utopia
engaging in critical dialogue.
and encouraging collective action
It's inspiring to see art being used,
as a platform for imagining
working towards.
positive social change.
It is. But of course,
As with any artistic movement,
there are also
critical voices
of the potential downsides.
of participatory art,
Right.
like Hal Foster.
Who argues that sometimes
The emphasis on
participation
can overshadow
the actual artistic content
of the work
Exactly.
there is concerned.
that the focus on creating
The fun
interactive experience
might sometimes come at the expense
of deeper meaning.
or artistic rigor.
He also worries about
A potential for participatory art
to be co-opted by institutions
or used to promote agendas,
that might not be truly.
participatory or emancipatory,
It's a good reminder.
that we need to be
Critical and discerning.
even when engaging with art.
That seems to be all about
Inclusivity.
and breaking down barriers.
We should always ask,
Who is being included and excluded?
what are the power dynamics at play?
Absolutely.
We need to be active participants,
Not just passive consumers
even when it comes to art.
that invite.
Our participation.
It's like anything else.
A participatory art has
It's pros and cons
its potential,
for both
positive,
and negative impact.
but it's definitely a fascinating movement
That raises important questions.
about the role of art in society.
I agree.
And it's a movement that continues
And challenge our assumptions
about what art can be.
and what it can do.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
From Dada hells
To beer drinking as art.
it seems like participatory art,
He's all about
shaking things up,
and challenging
how we think about art's role.
in the world.
It really is.
And what's so exciting is that
It's not just about changing the art world.
it's about using art
To engage with
bigger social and political issues.
exactly.
We've seen how artists
They're using participation,
to spark conversations about
creators,
social justice,
historical memory.
even the idea of utopia.
It's like art is becoming
This platform,
for exploring.
the complexities of our world,
And that brings us back to,
the key insight.
we've been circling around,
Participatory art isn't just about,
making objects,
it's about
creating experiences,
fostering connections
and using art.
as a catalyst for dialogue and change.
It's like a shift
From art as a finished product
to art as
and an ongoing process
an interaction.
between the artist and the audience.
Precisely.
And it raises some fundamental questions.
About the nature of art itself.
What is art?
Who gets to decide?
Can anyone be an artist?
These are questions that
Participatory art forces us.
to reconsider.
And maybe that's the point.
It's not about finding definitive answers.
It's about
Exploring
and pushing the boundaries.
of what art can be.
Absolutely.
And it reminds us that art,
It's not just a luxury.
or an escape from reality,
It can be a powerful tool.
for understanding and shaping our world.
This whole deep dive.
As it's so insightful.
Before we wrap up
I want to leave you.
with a final thought,
Remember Schlingensiefs.
please love Austria.
It's amazing.
How that artistic representation
Of a detention center.
sparked more outrage
Yeah.
than the actual detention center itself.
It is a powerful example, isn't it?
It makes you wonder,
Why does art sometimes have
a more profound impact.
than reality?
Maybe because art
This
has
unique ability
to bypass our defenses
to make us feel things.
more viscerally.
Yeah.
It's because art creates a safe space,
For us to confront
difficult issues,
without feeling.
overwhelmed.
It's probably a combination of factors.
But ultimately,
It shows that art has
this incredible potential
to raise awareness,
provoke dialogue,
and challenge us.
to see the world differently,
And that's something worth remembering.
both as creators
And as participants.
in the world around us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us
On this deep dive into,
the world of participatory art,
we hope you've enjoyed the journey.
and that you'll continue to explore these ideas.
On your own.
Until next time.